So we have Patrick and Bell today from CEA Saclay that will talk about star formation. So Patrick did his PhD in 2000 and then after did a postdoc in Cardiff. He was hired as a CNAP in 2004 at the LERMA, at Observatoire de Paris, and at the ENS, and then got position at CEA Saclay, where he is now in 2012. Patrick is a specialist of the theory of the interstellar medium and the associated star formation. He combines both analytical theory of the ASM star formation to numerical modeling, and is a specialist of Ramses and MHD simulations. So Patrick, I'll give you the floor. You will give more insight into this.
Okay, many thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to speak in front of the, at the IAP. Also, I must say I'm terribly frustrated not to be there physically. Actually, when I was a student, it was 94, I think, IAP was one of the first institute of astrophysics that I visited for a project. So I think for many reasons, it can be considered as one of the central place for astrophysics in Paris. Okay, so today, first, it is even more frustrating not to see the audience face to face, and usually when you give a talk, you can see in the eyes of, you can read in the eyes of the attendants the agreement or the disagreement, or many message that today it will not be possible. So at least do not hesitate to interrupt me and ask questions. This would give me the feeling that I'm not alone speaking in front of my screen. Okay, so when Sandrine and Johan contacted me for this talk, I was thinking, well, okay, what should I speak about? So I thought about the science that is being done at the EAP, and I guess many people are doing like large scales, say galaxies, and also many others are doing planets. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I should try to somehow cover a bit a broad topic and try to make the link between these two scales. And that's typically what star formation is good at, because as you see from the title of my talk, star formation is, I would say, truly genuinely a multi-scale process. So the work I'm going to present today has been done with many colleagues. Many of them are young, so from student here, and now postdocs or working in the other field and permanent people. Right. So So as I just said, star formation and more generally the physics of the ISM, I would say, is a key step in the history of our universe, because it makes precisely the link between the large one. Say, I would start large for me is a galaxy. Of course, I know that you can go bigger, but typically that's where I'm spending most of my time, and planets. And this happens through a series of scales. So inside galaxy, we find those molecular clouds. So typically 10 to the 5-ish solar mass. Regions where gravity has been taken over, which are named cores, which are really baby stars. So the gravity is bringing mass together and conducting a collapse. And if you zoom further around the star, you find those protoplanetary disks, which, as is obvious for their name, play a fundamental role to generate planets. So this is really the playground, and associated to this. So just to maybe to be clear, this covers almost tens orders of magnitudes in terms of scales. So going from, say, the galactic radius to the stellar radius, it's roughly on the order of 10th order of magnitude of scale. So this is an enormous range of spatial scale. And you have questions, fundamental questions, I would say, for really the history of the universe, which are associated to them. First, we have the questions of the star formation rate and the efficiency. For a given mass of gas, how much fraction of that mass is being converted into stars in a given amount of time. And tentatively, I place it in between those two, okay? But that's tentative, I would say. Then we have the questions of the initial mass functions. So typically, the mass spectrum of stars, which again is playing a very important role for many, many fields of astrophysics, just because stars are the building block of our universe. So low mass stars, they will host planets. Massive stars, they have a lot of feedback and they spread the heavy element they have been synthesizing. So that's also another, I would say, holy grail of the star formations field. And then, of course, the protoplanetary disks. And finally, to close the loop, in a sense, these feedback processes, which really couple, in a sense, the radius of a star, and if not the radius of a galaxy, at least probably the thickness of the galaxy. Okay, so that's where this kind of invert cascade takes place. Okay, so today I'm going to focus on the issue of the star formation rate that, as you will see, will touch on going into the large scales of the galaxy and to the initial mass functions, which will go not to the galactic radius, but typically AU-ish scales. Okay. So the question of the star formation rate. So two important messages. First, if we try to do a naive estimate, let's take the molecular gas in the galaxy, say 1 billion solar mass, and naively we divide this by the free fall time on the order of 1 million years or so. It depends how you estimate it. Okay. From this very naive expectation, you would expect 100 to 1,000 solar mass forming every year in the galaxy. And this is typically 100 times more than what is observed. Okay. So this is actually a central problem in the star formation community. Star formation is terribly inefficient with respect to what you would expect for gravity, which means other processes maybe are as important or maybe even dominate over gravity. And so there is a running question over years, which one then is dominant? Okay, is it magnetic field? Is it turbulence? Is it feedback? And the second important aspect of the quantity is the star formation rate dependence on the Coulomb density, so the famous Schmidt-Kennicut relation, which typically said that the star formation rate expressed here as a Coulomb density is proportional to the Coulomb density to the 1.4. Okay, so okay, this of course is contained here. So this just say that star formation is very inefficient, and this quantify in a sense the amount of star formation you have to explain as a function of Coulomb density. Okay. So then the second, as I said, holy grail of the star formation community is the initial mass functions. There is this cartoon here, which show that at high mass, you have this slope. So something like a scale-free process, okay, with this typical slope obtained by Salpeter in 55, minus 1.3-ish. Okay, then there is a peak, which is around 0.3 solar mass, which says something important. Okay, there is a characteristic scale for the mass, I mean, of the star. There is a process operating at some scale, which set a mass for the stars. Okay, the star formation process is not scale free, or is not, I mean, in terms of mass. At some stage, something set a typical mass, and this something, I would argue, has to be identified, and I will propose a candidate today. Okay, and at lower mass, well, there is something like a cutoff, and then you have brown dwarf and middle mass stars and brown dwarf. The other very puzzling aspect, which the initial mass function, is that it is terribly robust. When you change environment, you tend to find the same thing statistically, obviously. People have been struggling for years to find deviations. Now, some deviations in the early massive type galaxies seems to be slightly different initial mass function, but not hugely, okay? In spite of the fact that really you can probe extremely different physical conditions in terms of densities by orders of magnitudes, radiations, temperature, and so on, turbulence. So again, there is something which tends to produce this universality. So my personal reading, and that's what will the line I will follow when I discuss the AMF today, is that this process has to be understood as a scale-free process. And we have process around, like gravity and turbulence. They tend to be scale-free, so they are good candidates. And something which sets the mass, okay? Right, so the plan of my talk will be essentially divided into 3 parts. So first, I will kind of present something like a typical ISM modeling that will sit in this middle of the scale I was discussing. So typically from kiloparsec-ish to, I will go up to milliparsec to try to address these 2 questions. As you will see, some success, fortunately, are, I would say, obtained, but also some very big failure, okay? And those failure, I think, I like failure in science, actually. I find it very, very exciting when something does not work, okay? Because it means something has to be understood and there is a scientific message in this failure. So my scientific message of those failures will be that we have to identify what is really regulating star formations and explaining the Schmidt-Kenniket relation, and the proposition will be the influence of large-scale turbulent driving coming from the galaxy. And the second failure is the peak of the IMF, which, as you will see, does not work. And I will tell what I think is happening. Okay. So yeah, so the type of modeling we are going to do, I'm quickly skimming through the processes. So of course we use this Ramses code. So external gravity due to stars and dark matter is taken into account. So there is a confining gravity. So cell gravity, MHD turbulence, standard ISM cooling. So in terms of numerical scheme, we use the so-called sinc particle, which are Lagrangian particles which interact with the grid through gravity, essentially, so they can accrete gas. And because of the typical resolution I'm having there, they will represent essentially clusters and not individual stars. And then for this particular, for the purpose of the feedback, we assume, so it's not fully self-consistent because it would imply a huge, resolving a huge amount of scale, but so we assume for the feedback that we get a canonical initial mass function. And so each time the gas or the sink accrete 120-ish solar mass, we decide that the massive stars is formed, and we can then decide randomly its mass. And so those massive stars, they exert feedback. So after their typical lifetime, so that we can track this. So they have a supernova between 4 and 40 million years, and typically. So then we know roughly the amount of momentum that is spread. They have ionizing radiation, and we also include the UV heating that we assume is proportional to the star formation rate. So I will present a series of simulations, which typically goes from kiloparsec with a resolution 1-2 parsec when I'm trying to investigate, to focus more on the star formation rate. And then the idea is to use this as initial conditions, which was actually my initial motivations to investigate this configuration, to go up to the cores scale, so the prestellar cores that I was describing at the beginning of the talk, which are believed to be the progenitor of the stars. Okay, so this is an example of this type of simulation. So this is seen Aegon, and so this is the current density, and this is the density and velocity. So so in these simulations, so star formation is being treated, and the feedback as well. So you have essentially two equilibrium. One kind of mechanical equilibriums in the directions perpendicular to the plan, which is between gravity and, say, turbulent pressure or turbulent dispersions. And there is another energy equilibrium between the energy that is injected by the feedback processes and which is dissipated essentially here by the grid. And we don't treat the detail of the energy dissipation. It would be too demanding. Okay, we try, as I said, to measure the SFR, the star formation rate, as one of the quantity. And so we can vary the number of processes included in the simulation. So here we have the total mass in stars or in sync particles as a function of time. So this is for, I would say, Milky Way type simulations with a column density slightly larger but comparable to the Milky Way, larger by a factor 2. So here we have pure hydro and no feedback. Here we have MHD with a 5 macrogauss field typical of the ISM initially. Here we have MHD and supernova feedback. And here we have MHD, supernova, and H2. And there is shear being included here as well, the typical galactic shear. Okay, so what we see, and this is the typical mass of stars that you would form if you were following the Schmidt-Kennicut relations for this particular column density chosen initially. So what is important is the slope, because one of the difficulties in the simulation is that the initial conditions are always arbitrary. So the hope is that if you wait long enough, you get a sort of self-regulating cycle, and after some times, the feedback, the number of stars and the feedback sort of self-regulate, and so you can start comparing apple with apple. So the idea is that the slope, the asymptotic slope we get here, should be compared with this one. Okay, so clearly, if you have no feedback and pure hydro, this is we get a star formation which is orders of magnitude larger than what is observed, exactly like in this simple order of magnitude I was giving during the introduction of the talk. Magnetic field with the typical ISM magnetizations helps a little bit, but not very much, I would say. What starts making a big difference is the supernova feedback. And even worse, even better, I would say, when you add H2, okay, then you start getting a slope that is comparable, maybe still a bit factor 2-ish larger, okay, but of course, those simulations, they also have big error bars, like resolution, the detail, and so on. So typically, I'm not discussing this today, but from varying those parameters, we estimate the accuracy, the numerical accuracy of the simulation within a factor 2. So, okay, this is approaching, I would say this is much better, and this is approaching this number here, maybe it's a bit larger, but I will come back to that later precisely. So for the now, I will consider that this is making sufficient job. I mean, and when the way from here to here is quite reasonable. And we can see by having a look on this PDF here, so the density distribution, that what feedback does really is it stabilizes the gas against gravitational collapse. So this is exactly what you would expect. You see the PDF is I mean, there is more dense gas as you add more and more feedback. So you prevent the gravitational collapse. So you stabilize, in a sense, the interstellar gas against gravitational instability. So that's exactly what we see with this density PDF. So this is, I would say, encouraging. Okay, encouraging. Maybe on the way to succeed. But when there is a big failure, is okay. Now, as I said, the goal is the quantitative aspect is really the Schmidt-Kennickert relation, which I can remind you here is essentially the star formation rate as a function of column density. And so the Schmidt-Kennickert relations find an exponent of 1.4 between the two. So what I was simulating before was there, and as you see, I was maybe a bit above, but not that far. Okay. When we repeat the same parameter exploration, so when we vary the column density by a factor almost 10 in those simulations, so spanning really these regions of the Schmidt-Kennickert diagrams, we see that this is completely out of the game. It does not work at all, okay? We do not get an exponent 1.4, we get an exponent 2.6. Okay, so there are error bars and so on, they are complicated to obtain, but no way, okay? So it means that the paradigm is failing. There is something important, something dominant is not included here, okay? And that's a limit of this kiloparsec self-regulated box. So I will come back to that later. Okay. Oops. Right. So now the second the second aspect, which is complementary and very important for the star formation process, so the initial mass function, is supposed to come out of the same paradigm. It should be produced self-consistently in the same type of work. In principle, all the physics, all the ISM physics I described and we include should also produce this. So going up to the initial mass function is pretty hard because the radius of stars is far below our resolution. But there is this result from the literature that the core mass functions, so the progenitor of cores that I was describing before, has a slope, more than a slope, than a distribution, which presents similarities with the initial mass function. So you see here the core mass function as obtained with Herschel, and this is the initial mass function. So there have been a lot of discussions and propositions and models, including, for example, us with Gilles Chabouillet, using this type of Press-Injector analysis applied to the ISM conditions, which successfully reproduce the core mass function from the physics of the ISM. And so there is this idea that if we get the core mass function, this is a progenitor for the initial mass function, that would be the explanation, okay? So today, and in any case, even if this is not true, still the core mass function has to be explained from the simulation, okay? So that's what I'm assuming for now, that the IMF could be due to the CMF, so I'm trying now to reproduce the CMF. And so to do that, we essentially take the same simulation like what I just described, but we will use the full capacity of the adaptive mesh refinements to really zoom and go much deeper in scale. So this is what obtained. So here we typically bridge the gap between 1 kiloparsec and a numerical resolution of like 2, 4, or 10 to minus 3, depending on which simulation, which I would say, unfortunately, means a physical resolution, which is at least a factor 10 above that, because when you want to solve the physics, you need to have at least 10 cells, and my at least is very optimistic. I would vote more for 20 or 30. But okay, say 10 for, for the purpose of optimism. So each of those small points here is actually a core, okay? And so you see we have many, many cores, and we have filaments and so on. So we can do statistics, and we can do core mass function. Yeah, that's the same thing with a series of zoom. Okay, so we can extract the cores by using a kind of algorithm. So in our case, we use the same algorithm that has been developed in cosmology. So the so-called HOP algorithm, where you look at density peak, and then we go down the slope up to the point where we find a saddle point, and that we call that a core. This definition is questionable, and actually there are many ways to identify the cores. We are now working with Observer to extract the cores exactly in the same way as they do in the observation, and to compare and the limit and so on. Okay, so those are the 2 core mass functions we obtained. So the first step is to get this extracted cores. And then the second step is to apply some kind of filtering. So typically in our case, we ask either that they are magnetically supercritical, meaning that the magnetic field is not sufficiently strong to resist gravity, or that they are simply thermally supercritical, meaning that the thermal support is not strong enough that they could resist gravity. We could also combine, we could do many things. I'm giving them here to give a hint of the type of error bars we can get on this procedure. Right, so we obtain those distributions. They are, I would say, so this is, this slope is Salpeter, this is M-2. It's not perfect, but the observed core mass function is not perfect neither. So I would say, again, encouraging signal with a lot of carefulness. But there is a big but, there is a huge but actually, is the origin of this peak here. Okay, we have to understand what set up the peak in this simulation. So again, we have a scale-free process, turbulence and gravity. I think they can do a good job with that, but what's the peak here has to be understood. And here, the first thing you do as an numerist, you change resolution. So you change resolution, and so those are AMR level, adding more and more to the resolution. And then what we see is, as we increase more AMR level, the core mass function happily move toward lower and lower scales. The good sort of news is that, yeah, you see the slope is not changing too much. So that means there may be some robustness, but not in the peak. So yes, that's, I think, linked to this. The cores are not well-defined objects. They are really gas, and they are decoupling and collapsing. We are actually analyzing this with Fabien Louvet at the moment. And we are finding, just to give you an idea, that the absence of peak in the core mass function is actually more serious. It is also there in the observation, we believe. Okay, right. So let me conclude the part 1. So the minimum ISM physics, including most of the effects we believe are fundamental at scale between kiloparsec and milliparsec. I prefer to say not unsuccessful, okay, because you see there's still room for debate, but not unsuccessful to explain the star formation rate of the Milky Way type, maybe a bit too large, factor 2-ish. Not unsuccessful to explain the slope of the ASM, of the CMF, which may be the slope of the initial mass function if we believe that the two are linked. But this is completely unsuccessful to explain the Schmidt-Kennicut relation and to explain the peak of the MF. That's completely break. Okay. Okay, so it means for those two, we need to do something, and the most natural thinking, I would say, is to go to larger scale for the star formation rate. Some kind of energy injections that could be linked, and to go from a smaller scale for the initial mass functions. Okay. So the idea that I'm going to follow now is that what is missing in the kind of galactic box or kiloparsec box I was describing is the influence of the larger scales. A galaxy or a galactic box is not isolated. It is sitting, in, of course, in a galaxy, and thinking of the galactic disk, there is a lot of energy which probably cascade, which may be taped from the rotation curves from the huge energy reservoir, and which is probably cascading. So that's what the line we are following now, that there is another source of large-scale turbulence. So the source we foresee is the orbital energy of the galaxy, and it's not an idea which is new. Frédéric Bourneau and also Mark Cromwell have been thinking along this line. And so in terms of this turbulence paradigm of energy injections, so the source of energy on which you can tape is typically the rotation energy divided by the radius, which is an enormous source for free energy for the Milky Way. Not that much if you go to denser galaxies. How do we drive? Well, then we use a standard implementation of the driving, which is an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process. So essentially, the mode for the forcing that are added to the momentum equations advance at each time steps. So they decay, but then you add the stochastic terms, which is essentially random. And we decided to force essentially solenoidal mode, 57%, and 25% compressible. So this may influence a bit the result. We have been testing this, but it's not so critical. Importantly, what we foresee is an influence from the large scale of the galaxy. And the galaxy at first approximation is a 2D object. It's completely flat, okay? Because the radius is much larger than the thickness. So we drive in 2D. The driving is 2D only, okay, in the plan. And how intensively do we drive? This is a fundamental question, obviously. So the quantity we have to determine is this one. So the amount of energy that is injected. And this is specific in this case. So you see the typical turbulent machinery tells you that it is proportional to the cube of the velocity divided by the scale. And another fundamental quantity that we will use today is this Toomre criteria. Typically, disks are observed, they believe to sort of self-regulate in a sense, and they are observed to be always near Q around 1, typically. So we use this to estimate the amount of energy which should be injected, because Q is so the velocity dispersion times the epicyclic frequency divided by sigma, okay? And so from that, if Q equal 1, we see that sigma here is proportional, so the small sigma, the velocity dispersion, is proportional to the current density, okay? Just from this relation. And so if I come back to this, you see that epsilon should be proportional to the current density to the free. And this is the specific value. So the total injected power is proportional to the current density to the 4, which is a very stiff dependence. Okay, so it means if you change the current density by factor 2, you have to change the injected energy by a factor 16. It's large. And incidentally, and that's also something very important, you see here that feedback cannot provide enough energy. It has not the right scaling. If you assume that the feedback, that the energy delivered by the feedback is proportional to the star formation rate, as it should, I guess, just from Schmidt-Kennicott, you see that this the available energy power is proportional to sigma to the 1.4. It's not enough. It's not enough to ensure Q around 1. And that's important because it is exactly in the line of what we find numerically. As you saw, we find that the star formation rate, the Schmidt-Kennicott law, is not reproduced when we have only feedback. And I think the explanation sits right there. Okay, feedback cannot make it. Okay, so those are two simulations done by my student Noé Brussy. So this is without feedback. Sorry, without forcing. It's just the feedback. Okay, and it is a galaxy which is denser than the one I just presented. So you see, you see it's Hadron and Faison. Okay, so you see the gas essentially, well, first collapsing in the along the disk. You see the collapse occurring all the way, and yes, quickly you start seeing all the feedback exploding, and you see pushing the gas out of the galactic plane. But you see, all the actions is concentrated around few regions. Why? Precisely because feedback is not sufficiently strong to resist the huge gravitational collapse. So you focus on one or few spots. Okay, now the same, but with our turbulent forcing, which I remind you is 2D and quite intense, proportional to sigma to the 4. Okay, so you see those essentially like of shear. So we have a 2D, so it's a 2D turbulence. So you see, it's completely different. It's completely different. We have all these very strong support. It's so strong that all the layers, it's like layers, are moving parallel to the galactic plane, and this is what you need to reduce the star formation rate to the level of is observed from the Schmidt-Kennicott tradition. Right, so let's look at now quantitatively what do we have. So this is again the star formation rate.
Sorry, Patrick, I have a question for the turbulence driving setup. You have supernova feedback as well?
Yeah, I'm coming back to that. We have in both cases we have all the driving. Huh? It's just that in one case, sorry, we have all the feedback I was describing first, including supernova. But on top of, in one case we drive, in the other case we don't drive the turbulence. Okay. So so this is again the star formation rate. So this red curve is the one essentially I was showing first, with only feedback, so no driving. So supernova is the most important. Huh? And the slope 2.5, and that's, you see, two different power of injection. So one is proportional to 2.5 the current density, and the other one is 3.8. And so as you see, when we drive 3.8, so exactly like in this back to the envelope calculation I was describing, then okay, we find a slope that then we recover the Schmidt-Kennicott relation. So the proposition here is that the gravitational instability on large scales, they tape on the rotation curves, on the energy, the free energy, which is this rotation, and they degrade this energy into turbulence, which in cascade and feed the ISM at a scale of a kiloparsec and prevent the gas to collapse too strongly. And so to elaborate on your question, Johan, this is a comparison of the star formation rate that you obtain. If you do only driving only, so it's for a Milky Way type, if you do driving only, and if you do feedback only. If you remember, I was when I was describing first the Milky Way type, I said that the star formation rate was approaching Schmidt-Kennecke, but it was still maybe a bit too low. Huh? So the reason why is maybe because also in the Milky Way type we need some feedback from driving from the large scales, which is not so important, but it's not negligible. And that's what this experiment would suggest. To really reproduce it, you need to have both. Also, in our case, in the Milky Way case, maybe we are dominated more by feedback. But then if we go to something denser, then there is no way. If you do only feedback, you are far above the Schmidt-Kennecke flow. And if you do driving, then you are better. And if you do the two of them, then you can really explain it. Okay. So right, obviously, this needs to be now explored at a full galaxy scale, and that's what Noé Brussy, which is a student of me and Frédéric Bourneau, is now doing, trying to do a series of galactic simulation and analyze them in terms of this energy cascade, how much energy can be taken from the large scales, and we cascade them. That's what we are doing at the moment. Okay, let me now come back to the third part of the talk, which is this initial mass function. So I remind you that the issue is that the peak of the IMF, so the typical stellar mass that stars distribution present, is not reproduced by ISM-like simulation. So this suggests a change of strategy. And for a sec at least, or for a sec or for a while maybe, abandon the dream of simulating self-consistently the whole ISM. Also, that's what we are trying to do by a different approach at the moment. But okay, just concentrating on a single clump. Okay, so typically several hundred or thousand solar mass clump, and look this time at the distribution not of the cores, but directly the sync particles, so which I remind you are a subgrid model of the stars, and that are used, say, to probe or to mimic the star formation in those type of simulations. So this type of calculation has been done before with different success, but not in a systematic way. And so you see, depending on the simulations, you see the peak may vary. Here it is at 0.03, here it may be at 0.1, here again 0.03, here maybe at 0.2. So this needs to be exactly clarified. What do we find? Okay. Also, you may notice that the slope is not really Salpeter. Okay. So again, the setup we use is 1,000 solar mass clouds. We add turbulence by hand from the beginning. They mimic the initial conditions. So the cloud is receiving turbulence from the formation phase. And very importantly, the gas, as those densities, is initially isothermal because essentially of the dust cooling. But as density increases, at some stage, the dust becomes opaque to its radiation. So the photons cannot escape the gas just because they are trapped. The opacity is too high. So this effectively turns an equation of state being isothermal to an equation of state being adiabatic. So with an effective gamma larger than 5/3. So you can do that either by using a prescription, analytical prescription like this one, which is what I'm going to do today. But you can also do full radiative transfer using, for example, the flux limited diffusion. And that's what we have been doing recently in the series of papers. Essentially, these have not changed mainly the conclusion. Okay, and so the idea is that we can vary, ideally everything, which means density, turbulence, magnetic field, equation of state, numerical resolution. Okay, so today I will concentrate on density and equation of state and speak a bit of resolution. Right, so that's typically the type of simulation we obtain, where so the red dot are the sync particles that form. So those are two snapshots here, and this is a small scale view on the simulations. Okay, so here we have a series. We have 4 simulations actually, where we change the density. Okay, we change the density, everything otherwise equal. Okay. From like diffuse, like 10 to the 3-ish, up to 10 to the 7-ish. So in terms of physical parameter, this is the ratio of the thermal over gravitational energy with change. So you can also describe it as a Mach number if you want. Okay. So as we go in that direction, the thermal support, so this and then this, becomes lower and lower, while the ratio of kinetic over gravitational energy is kept fixed. Okay, so and then the various slopes here, or the various curves here, they correspond to different time steps of the same simulation. Okay, so what we found, if the density is low, so meaning if the thermal support is high, we find something which does not look at all like a standard IMF. It's completely flat. Okay, m to the 0 is flat, completely flat. As we increase the density, or equivalently the Mach number, you start seeing this sort of power law developing with a peak. And then, as you see, interestingly, the peak, once it is there, it does not change with density. If we increase again the density, and I'm speaking 3 orders of magnitude, so it's not a factor of 2, the peak does not change, okay? And the whole spectrum does not change. It's almost constant, okay? So this is very appealing, okay? Because it means we have here a candidate, okay? Contrary to what's happened for the ISM, full ISM simulation I was describing. Here we have a candidate for A, a peak, and B, a robust spectrum which does not depend too much on the initial conditions. Okay, of course, this has to be verified by running by doing other simulation, like changing the turbulence, the magnetic field, and so on. So this we have been doing. I'm not going to present them today, but essentially this is the same answer. Okay. Of course, the first things you have to worry about is whether what you see is reflect your physics or whether it reflects the numerics. As we saw for the ISM type, full ISM type simulation, the conclusion was that the peak was just numerical. It was directly linked to the mesh, the resolution. So we must again check that this is whether it's the case here or not. So here you have 3 simulations done for assuming isothermal equation of state. So no influence of no change of the equation of state at high density. So here you see that the same story repeats itself. As we increase the resolution, in the isothermal case, you see the peak happily shifting toward the left, exactly like in the full ISM simulations. If we have the equation of state, so the fact that the gas becomes opaque to its radiation at high density, like 10 to the 10, when essentially the photons are trapped by the dust, so the equation of state becomes adiabatic, we see it's completely different. You change the resolution, the peak doesn't move at all. Okay, so this means that most presumably, this is the equation of state, which is actually setting this peak. And so to further analyze this, we have varied this equation of state. So we change the exponent and the equation, so the density at which the gas switch from isothermal to adiabatic. And if gamma is larger than 4/3, we know that thermal support sort of wins over gravity. So it means that you have a truly hydrostatic structures, which is known as the first Larsen core. And so we can compute its mass. For a given equation of state, we can compute the mass of this first Larsen core, which is just a static structures, like a star, like a macro, well, micro or micro in terms of mass and macro in terms of size. The size of the Larsen cores is typically 5 AU, and the mass is like 3 × 10⁻², mass, solar mass. Okay, so we have here profiles of this Larsen core. Okay, and then you see the mass. There is a plateau here. So we can vary the mass of this Larsen core by changing the equation of state, and so that's what is done here. That's the mass of this Larsen core. That's the mass of the peak of the AMF, and as you see, the peak of the AMF nicely follow the mass of the first Larsen core with a factor 10 difference. And the origin of this factor 10, I'm not going to speak it today, but we developed models for that by doing sort of statistical counting of the fluctuations that can form in the neighborhood of the forming stars. Essentially, we claim that this is because of the tidal forces and other type of support that limits the ability of the gas to fragment in the neighborhood of a collapsing stars when there is a very steep density profile. You have tidal forces that tend to shear apart the fluctuations and make that those cores somehow they protect themselves by further fragmentations through the tidal forces. So they sort of clear a sphere in the surrounding medium. They protect a sphere in the surrounding medium from further fragmentations, and so they accrete this sphere. Okay, so that's a paper published in 2019 where we proposed this. Okay, right, and this there have been a thesis by Tidney Coleman under the supervision of Romain Tessier, which has kind of confirmed this picture. Okay, so I'm now reaching my conclusions. So my main message here is that to explain star formation and more generally structures in the galaxy, we must really think multi-scale. Things are interconnected. Regarding the SFR, my main conclusions is that feedback does not make the job by itself. You need something else. The candidate we have been proposing today is that there is a strong turbulent forcing induced by the large galactic scale. So galaxy is a full turbulent cascade in itself, and there is this flux of energy initiated from the large scales, which cascade down and stabilize the gas against fragmentation. And the star formation is not explained uniquely by the ISM physics up to milliparsec scale. You need to go down to AU scale to get the peak. And to get in, the proposition is that the peak of the IMF is actually due to related to the dust opacity limit, which typically occurs at AU scale. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Patrick, for your nice presentation. So I will now circulate the microphone for questions. So we already have Nikos with a question, so please open your mic.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, merci, Patrick. Thanks for the nice talk. I have a question about the star formation rate. You mentioned the Schmidt-Kennicutt law, which of course concerns the total amount of gas. Now, as you know, many years ago from the THINKS survey, Bidiel and Leroy have shown that there is a very nice relationship between star formation rate and the molecular gas in galaxies with their analysis on sub-kiloparsec scales. It's a linear relation, very easy to understand. And this makes a difference because Kennicut has a total amount of gas. And as you know, in disk galaxies, there is a difference. Molecular gas is mostly in the inner galaxy. Atomic gas has a flat profile. In your simulations, of course, you have, I guess, the molecular gas. You find it in your simulations, the conditions of temperature and density, but you don't seem to attach some importance in producing a linear relationship on the star formation rate with the molecular surface density, which is found in the observations. I think, in my view, it's more physically intuitive that the star formation goes as the molecular gas, not the total gas. And we see that it makes a difference in the the outskirts of galaxies. So what do you think about that?
No, I think this would certainly be part of the understanding. I would say it's a bit more advanced than where we are at the moment. I mean, my first concern was that the disagreement we obtained with this feedback approach was so important that the paradigm, which is largely used by, say, ISM physicists, of course, it's probably more natural for people like Johan that simulate the whole galaxy, or Frederick. But then, of course, we have more, we have the advantage of our disadvantage that we can do the small scale. So yeah, the first things was to really say, also to our community, hang on, there is something which is not working there. And so now we are starting probably finding other trace. It's very preliminary, but other trace of this large scale driving. So the goal is really to find a minimal setup that can be useful to carry out the ISM driving or the ISM study. So I do agree with what you say. We will probably have also to somehow simulate the H2 formations to be really sure of the fraction of the molecular gas, because as you know, in particular, it depends on the UV, and so the UV is more important if you have more massive stars. So yeah, that will be one of the next steps. At the moment, we have not been investigating the more detailed or the more advanced, I would say, relation.
Okay.
Vas-y Gary, c'est à toi.
Okay, merci Patrick. There was a very nice talk, very didactic, pedagogical. So turbulence is a main driver. Okay, so I think you convinced us of this, but what I don't understand is the details. In your simulation, if I remember correctly, the turbulent motions of the gas were often oblique in the edge-on view and also in the face-on view, in what I thought was a rotating disk. Because in my opinion, what's going on is that the differential rotation of the galaxy should be the main driver of this energy injection, all right? And the shear of this differential rotation will create cascades of turbulence, if you wish. But they should be fairly geometrical, and the turbulent motions that you see might lead to star formation later that will follow these turbulent motions, and which we could test today by looking at Gaia data and ask ourselves, do we see oblique motions in the galaxy from the Gaia proper motions? Or maybe am I going too far? What do you think?
No, maybe I can come back to that. The movement were parallel to the flow. They tend to be, I think you refer to this, yes. They were parallel to that direction. So this is the edge-on view of the disk. So they are parallel because we do a 2D forcing. Here there tends to be some privileged direction which persists for a while, but if you go at the end of the movie, you see they become completely messy. So one possibility, I mean,
it's
one
12 hours. Sorry.
Is maybe with the driving, because it's a 2D driving, so you need the properties of 2D turbulence are very different from 3D turbulence. So there are still some things to be understood here. And I think that's really where the multi-scale aspect boils down. And as I said, we are now, so this is done in work in collaboration with Frédéric Bourneau. So now we are really taking a full galaxy and to try to do this analysis self-consistently on a full galaxy to calculate the amount of energy which is taped from the rotation as a function of this column density, and to try to set up the properties of the turbulence. So this is the step we are doing now. This is a poor proxy in a sense. So we need now to do better, and that's what we are trying to work on.
Great, great. So I was wrong. So in the edge-on view, everything's okay. So it was in the face-on view that I thought I saw oblique moment.
Yeah, there is some persistence of this behavior which stays for a while. As I said, it breaks at the end. The forcing on 2D turbulence is something new to my knowledge. I think we are the first to use it. And the physical motivation is, of course, galaxy is flat. If you force in 3D, then you completely destroy the disk.
Yes, yes,
but
yes.
You should not force from kiloparsec scale on 3D.
I agree, that was a good idea. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pardon, vas-y, Jean-Pierre, c'est ton tour.
It was a very good talk, very instructive, and all this is extremely impressive, but I have some doubts. I wonder if you are really simulating a stellar formation. The reason is that most stars are or were in binaries or multiple systems, and this does not appear in your simulation. Do you really believe it is somehow going to appear, the multiplicity at some lower stage, I would say? You don't have to take it into account from the beginning.
No. I mean, there is a lot of multiplicity actually. I mean, I didn't describe this today, but you can see here, this is really small scales, and in many cases, you have binaries around. I mean, this type of calculations have been done, of course, by other groups. You have here Pirer ID here. Okay. It's true that binary is an important quantity to reproduce. What is difficult is that the binaries, most binaries, they are observed in the field in more advanced system, like say what we call class 2, when the gas has gone and only stars remain. And this is very challenging for us, because it means we must follow the star formation process down to a very advanced stage, with typically million years or more. And when you have to integrate AU scale for million years, this is very challenging. So the colleagues which computed the binary properties find encouraging results, but there is this caveats of going to the long terms. And also I must say that there is actually a paper that I like very much, which is from Bo Wayport and one of his colleagues. They did this very interesting experiment. They took 3 bodies, just 3 bodies, okay? And with some prescriptions of the gas accretion, but there is something very simple, okay? They manage, and then they did that many times, okay? Just from these 3 body systems, and varying, you see the distance between 500 AU of this and so on. Just from 3 body physics, they managed to reproduce the observed binary distribution. So at the end of the day, it may be that the binary distribution is a very simple consequence of 3 body physics. So in short, I didn't discuss this today, but there is a literature on that. And I don't think this can be used very strongly in favor or disfavor of those theories. I mean, there is a lot of detailed comparisons for the gas, for instance. We are working with colleagues who observed disks. Disks are very difficult to reproduce, particularly because I didn't discuss this at all today, but because we believe that MHD processes and non-ideal MHD processes are controlling the disk formation. And we have a whole project to try to compare the disk formed in those type of simulations with the observed disk at different stage. And this, I think, is very tough constraint on the star formation process.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware it is extremely difficult problem, but of course I'm more interested in the end of the stellar evolution, and the people now claim that all massive stars are in binaries, for example. It would be interesting to see if it is really, you can see it in the formation process, but I am fully aware that it is extremely difficult and probably now impossible to do.
It's very challenging. So yeah, we are trying, but yeah, it's very challenging. Yeah.
Norma, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Patrick, for this very clear physical talk presentation. I have the point that I don't understand. I mean, perhaps I didn't catch the point. I mean, the worry you have to explain the peak of the ESM, initial stellar mass function, and then you invoke external, of course, you need external injection, and you invoke galaxy turbulence. I mean, and I don't, of course, turbulence is there, as you explained it in your simulation, but to explain this peak, I don't see how turbulence from galaxies could do that, because, I mean, first, we don't see, we have not observed enough turbulence in galaxies or in large scales. And we have, even theoretically, I mean, I don't see in galaxies. So that is what, and you need also to explain the time at which the peak is produced.
So, yeah.
And perhaps another injection mechanism too. I mean, some also with gravity, because the mass should account there. So this is my point. I mean, but of course,
yeah. So the energy, the extra energy injections we believe we need is to explain the Schmidt-Kennicut relations. It's to lower the efficiency of star formation. For the initial mass function for the peak, this is more the equation of state, which is important. But turbulence is very important, we believe, to explain this, actually, to explain the slope. If I come back to analytical models, oops, yes. So those analytical models, like potentiator type, this is the combination of gravity, and I didn't explain that today, but analytically, this is the turbulence support or turbulence dispersions, which provide those models.
I see. The point perhaps is in the turbulence in galaxies. I mean, do you have observational evidence for that? The turbulence in larger scales.
So in principle, yes. In particular, the fact that gas-rich galaxies have a higher turbulence is something which has been observed by several teams, and it seems that there is a kind of correlation between the column density and the velocity dispersion. So if you go to very gas-rich galaxy, you can get velocity dispersion up to 100 kilometers per second.
But this have not seemed to be included in what people do in galaxies in the simulations. I mean, in all this stuff, and that.
Yeah, my impression is, in principle, if you do a gas-rich galaxy, and for example, Frédéric Bourneau is doing that, you get higher velocity dispersion because the disk becomes very unstable, and so you have this cascade of energy which triggers motions. I mean, what we plan is to reanalyze, in a sense, these simulations with the more turbulent-oriented view, so to speak.
I see. Thanks.
Merci. Alexandre Toubiana, if you want to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. So I'm not from this community, the star formation rate community at all. I'm more working on the end states, or black holes and this kind of objects. And when we studied population of black holes, a very important quantity, usually the metallicity of the environment. And so you did not mention this at all in your talk. So I was curious to know if the metallicity has no impact. In particular, you said that we observed that more or less the same initial mass function in different galaxies. And so the fact that they might have different metallicities has no impact.
Yeah, so there have been some studies on the influence on the metallicity on the fragmentations. It has been found from density simulations, I'm taking work by Matthew Bate or Mark Cromwell, that the peak in particular does not change too much. Our interpretation is a bit detailed from this talk today, but it's that it turns out that the mass of the first Larsen core depends on the metallicity, but to a very weak power, like to the 1/3 or something like this. That's one thing. The second thing is that it depends. What it depends on is really the opacity of the gas, so the point where the gas becomes really opaque. And here, what happened is that if you are at a lower metallicity, temperature tends to be higher. Okay. Because there is essentially less cooling. But then the temperature dependence on the opacity is such that there tends to be some kind of compensation. So there is an appendix if you are interested in our recent paper that I can point you towards if you are interested. Essentially,
okay, yes.
We expect a weak dependence on the metallicity.
Okay. I understand. Thank you very much.
Nikos, if you want to.
Yes, I have another question about the IMF. You mentioned all the time the Chabrier IMF, the log-normal IMF, now, which of course has the slope and the peak. The slope means the physical regime, the peak has some mechanism. Now, Krupa persists in his multi-slope IMF, which has different slopes. And in his opinion, this means different physical regimes. It's a totally different physical interpretation, as you know. So what do you think about that? What's your opinion?
I like more and more Krupa IMF. Actually, I didn't, sorry, I have to find yeah. I didn't mention that today, but actually in the collapse calculation that I presented, we tend to find this slope here. We tend to find -0.34.
Wow, that's revolutionary.
It may be linked to the PDF, to the density PDF. So what we found in the more recent paper, so originally in this paper we wrote with Gilles, we consider what we call a log normal distribution for the PDF, okay, because this is the I would say the PDF that is observed in non-self-gravitating medium, and the idea was that the perturbations were due to turbulence, which pick up scores and then induce the collapse. But then more recently, in those studies I presented with my former student Yuning Li, yeah, we figure out. So you see the slope here. You see the slope here. Mm-hmm. It's between 3/4 and 1. It's not 1.3, and we think it's significant. So what we have actually built a model following a bit what we did with Gilles in 2008, but instead of using the log normal, we use a power law PDF, and the reason is that during the collapse, the gravity induces a power law PDF with a slope of -1.5, -3/2. And when you use -3/2, we do find those slopes says -3/4. So one possibility is that there are indeed different regimes, which boils down to the density PDF. At large scale, say you are dominated by the turbulent PDF, which is log normal. So then you tend to produce more salpeter. And as you go deep into the collapse, the PDF has completely changed because the change has been induced by the gravitation itself. And so you generate new fluctuations as you collapse that you would not have been generated by turbulence only. And so you change the slope. This is the best picture I can offer today, but this is ongoing research.
Yeah, it's fairly interesting. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, maybe we can ask you again. Thank you again, Patrick, and we can stop the recording.